Many times, non-Black minorities can feel isolated in conversations about race in America. The conversation is so often centered on Black and white that other voices are neglected. Ray Chang has experienced this and offers a powerful perspective on the issue of staying within white evangelical spaces. Ray is the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative, a campus minister at Wheaton College, and is passionate about laying the groundwork for the next generation. I'm so grateful for Ray's voice in this conversation and hope you enjoy this episode of Why I Stay. Welcome to a podcast about disciple making in the public square, where we talk about everyday issues from a biblical and balanced perspective. This is where life exists. This is Where Life Exists, where we talk about everyday issues from a biblical and balanced perspective. My name is Dahadi Lewis, the lead pastor of Blueprint Church and the vice president of the Sin Network. And I am here with Pastor Raymond Chang. He is a campus minister at Wheaton College, and he oversees the Asian American Christian Collaborative. What's up, Raymond? How you doing, sir?
Good. How are you, Dahadi? It's great to connect again.
It is always good, man. I still think about that spot you took me to when I came out there. It was delicious, and I need another invite so I can come back out there and break bread with you.
As soon as COVID's over, let's get it happening.
Yes, that is true. As soon as COVID is over. So that's a whole nother thing that we could talk about, but that's not why we're here today. We are here to talk about the current times that we're in. And as you already know, we are in the midst of a series of Why I Stay. Just as minorities within white evangelical spaces, there's a lot of pressure to do something, and the something that some people have chosen to do is to stay. And so, but we stay with a variety of different, in a variety of different ways. And so I just want to talk to you today, and ask you a few questions about kind of your experience. And so let's just kind of kick it off and just beginning with specifically you, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in white evangelical spaces.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good topic, and it's an important one, especially as we're seeing kind of this either reject or reform or revolutionize kind of the spaces that we're in. I grew up in 6th and 7th generation Korean American family that were Christian, and so 6 generations on one side Christian, 7 generations on another side that's Christian, and my parents immigrated to the United States, in their kind of late teens and mid 20s. For my dad, my mom came in her late teens, and grew up in an immigrant Korean American church, right? And so I was born here in the United States, but all I had known was the kind of the immigrant church experience, because I think for a lot of Korean Americans and a lot of Koreans that have immigrated to the United States, one of the things that's important for them is to find community where they can kind of let their hair down, understand how to navigate society, because sometimes the services aren't always available, and really grow in their faith, as well as figure out what it means to kind of exist and thrive in this in the country. But from an early age, I think I remember feeling a call to the pastorate. And so even at age 7, I think I remember saying to my mom, I think I want to be a pastor, not really knowing fully what that entailed. And then finding that, through junior high and high school, people would call me Pastor Ray because I was always preaching at them. Maybe not for the best reasons, but, it was always within me, wanting to call people to faithfulness, right? Hey, you're living an immoral life, or hey, this is more ethical, or hey, Jesus is calling you to this, and hey, this is what Jesus offers you. And so quite a few people, no matter where I moved, because even for high school, I went to 5 high schools. I lived in Korea, Hawaii, California, Guatemala, and one other place, two different high schools in California. People just kind of naturally call me Pastor Ray. And then I kind of came to Wheaton, had a lot of people start affirming as an undergrad student. So I'm working where I went to school at my alma mater, and affirming leadership skills and business skills within me. And so I thought, instead of going the pastoral direction, I might try a different direction. I worked in the for-profit, the nonprofit But in all of that, I felt like, I was missing kind of like like the common theme that I felt like was missing in my life was the sense of like an explicit gospel ministry. I wanted to declare the good news of Jesus. I wanted to tell everyone about his coming kingdom. I wanted to tell everyone about the hope and the joy and the love that is offered in Christ. And so my mid to late 20s, went to seminary, and I was planning on going to a seminary in California, but ended up meeting with Greg Waybright, who was the former president of Trinity. He just retired as the president, or not the president, as the senior pastor of Lake Avenue Church in California. And he knew my wife because my wife served as a student body president here at Wheaton College. And when he found out that I was thinking about going to a seminary in California, he said, "Hey, have you thought about Trinity Evangelical Divinity School?" And I said, "Actually, I've been thinking about that, but I'm not sure if I want to move back to Chicago, and it might be a little too expensive." And so he really helped kind of make an inroad into to come back to Chicago and to go to Trinity. And then also connected me with his former church here, which is the Orchard Evangelical Free Church, to do a kind of like a pastoral internship, a pastoral residency. And I think that was really my entree into white evangelicalism. Like the Orchard is known for having quite a few pastors become presidents at TEDS, or at Trinity International University, which is the kind of larger structure where TEDS is housed and situated. But until even though I went to Wheaton College, as a student, it's very different than getting on staff at a church and then looking at things from a much more kind of, I guess, seasoned lens, right? Because I was in my late 20s. And so that really changed the trajectory of my life in a lot of ways. Because I thought I was always going to go back to either the Korean immigrant church and work in English ministry, or an Asian American church or the Korean American church that was predominantly and primarily English speaking, or go to a multi-ethnic church that was probably Pan-Asian, because I was living in California at the time, and there are a lot of Asians in California. But because of my kind of my pastorate at the Orchard and my time at Trinity, and then when a job opened up here at Wheaton College, I applied to the role that I'm in now. And one of the things as I reflected back, I realized that I never thought I could work at a place like Wheaton, mostly because I never saw anyone that looked like me when I was a student here. Right. And so I thought, oh yeah, the employment here is reserved for people who don't look like me. And so I never saw myself in this space doing the thing that I'm doing. But someone passed down the job description and the application through the grapevine, and then I ended up applying, got the job 5-6 years ago, and I've been here since.
Yeah. Was it a hard jump to go from a Korean, American experience to a space that is predominantly Anglo?
Not really, because yes and no. And I think the yes is for a different reason than the no. No, because I lived all over the world, right? I was born and raised in Chicago. I lived in the North Shore suburbs, which is like predominantly Jewish, very white. And then the South Side of Chicago, which is predominantly Black. And so and then once I left Chicago, I lived in Korea, Hawaii, California, Guatemala, Panama, Spain, China, and probably a few other places that I don't remember right now, or I'm not mentioning right now. And living at all these places, and then traveling as extensively as I have, and then having like a very diverse group of friends, kind of changed the way that I navigated in and out of kind of cultural spaces. The challenge generally, both in any kind of like predominantly white evangelical space, is how whiteness, which a lot of people have a hard time with even the term, but don't understand where it actually, like how a lot of people of color generally understand like the feel, the culture, the commitments, the values that will allow them to kind of see what it is and understand what it is is oftentimes a stronger force than kind of a commitment and conviction to Christianity, and oftentimes conflated between the two. And so I found that to be far harder in any white evangelical space. You know, I just wish that it was just an evangelical space instead of a white evangelical space culturally, regardless of what the makeup was ethnically and racially. That the cultural force and the racial force is oftentimes far stronger. And so that made it much more difficult than actually me navigating from space to space or entering into a space that I'm not, that I'm unfamiliar with.
So, I mean, you kind of talked about some of the challenges. What would you say is your most challenging thing as you relate to navigating in these spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? There's quite a few challenges. There's a lot of joys, there's a lot of challenges. I think the primary challenges come down to really churches and schools not having adequately discipled and having educated people. For example, most people don't know Native American history, right? And they don't understand the present day realities of the things that plague the Native American communities. They think of, like I remember looking back at my own school, and I remember a few stories, Chief Black Hawk, the Wind Talkers, and then Thanksgiving, which was a sort of kumbaya between the settlers and the Native American kind of indigenous community. Then then even as I thought through like African American history, you often kind of touch on slavery, you touch on segregation, and then oftentimes you kind of assume through the educational process that that people share the same freedoms and the same experiences, but then don't really notice the disparities in wealth, disparities in opportunities, disparities in healthcare and education, the criminal justice system, and just simply the experience of people who are trying to navigate different spaces and feel like no matter what they do, simply by virtue of their skin color, they're not really welcome. Then you have Asian American history being almost completely erased to the point that people don't know people know Ellis Island, but don't know Angel Island, which was essentially what Ellis Island is to the west, and where a lot of the Asians came through. There's a little awareness around the Chinese Exclusion Act as the first race-based immigration ban, and the ways that that very patriotic Japanese people, Japanese Americans, were rounded up and then thrown into concentration camps. These are stories that are not oftentimes told and understood. And of course, Latin American history, land grabbing, exploitation, things like mass sterilization to Chicanas, and families currently being separated at the border. And these are all things that we have to like wrestle with and understand how these historical facts and realities impact our present day. And so I think the lack of discipleship around the ways that the church in America was overlaid on top of a racialized society that has never been fully kind of interrogated, analyzed, understood, and then the segregated realities that are oftentimes more voluntary now, to the point where churches in America throughout the country are on average more segregated than the neighborhoods that they're in, than the school districts that they're in. The fact that most multi-ethnic churches are led predominantly by white pastors instead of by pastors of color, and that the majority of any meaningful multicultural diversity and multiracial diversity that we see is with people of color entering into predominantly white spaces. We see that there's a lot of work that hasn't been done because we've gotten comfortable with the kind of segregated existence that's oftentimes rooted in kind of colorblind theology and ideology, and a unwillingness to really cross borders in the way that Jesus did to Samaria and beyond.
No, that's really good. Oftentimes in America, when we talk about issues of race and ethnicity and racialization and all those dynamics, it becomes a binary issue, white, black issue. I mean, how do you perceive that? And I mean, what are some of the challenges for you as a Korean Asian American with the conversation in America?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because on the one hand, you know what most Asian Americans and most Asian American Christians don't know is that we have more in common with the African American communities than we do with the predominantly white communities, right? Our histories are much more aligned in that sense, except when we look at the kind of economic realities and then the narratives that are kind of thrown out there, and the stereotypes that are imposed on Asian Americans as both the perpetual foreigner and as the model minority, which is a myth because there's great wealth gap. I mean, the largest wealth gap in America actually exists within the Asian community. Significant educational gaps exist within the Asian American community, and things of that sort. It makes it difficult for us to have a voice both to the white communities and to the Black communities, right? Because you'll often hear white communities utilize Asian Americans as the example by which other minority groups are somewhat disparaged. Why can't you be more like the Asians, right? Where at the same time, Black communities will oftentimes say the same thing. Is like, like, you guys are not like us. You don't have you're not oppressed. You don't have marginalized experiences. And so our voices are kind of erased in the process. Our existence and our experiences are erased. And so we're left with almost a kind of like an invisibility. We're left to be somewhat invisible in our societal imagination, which transfers into the church, which is why when, Asian Americans, when they speak up, they're oftentimes doubly punished. Why? Because oftentimes African Americans are known for their prophetic tradition, and so they're known to speak up, to advocate. But Asian Americans, when they do that, people don't know what to do with it. Like, so they get punished in a kind of like in two ways, right? In a twofold manner. But as a Korean American, I think that's been the most common experience that I've personally experienced, is this. I will use you, where it is beneficial, and the more assimilated you are, the more I will reward you. But the more you actually speak up for those who the Bible would speak up for, those who are marginalized and oppressed, those who are in the edges of a community, the more I will exclude you, right? And so I think that happens commonly throughout the United States, in and out of churches. It seems to happen more within evangelical churches, as I've been speaking to pastors and leaders within churches throughout the country. But that's one piece, and I think the other piece is that we're constantly having to navigate between the Black and white binary, where we don't know where we fit, and this is where a scholar named Claire Jean Kim is helpful in kind of talking about the racial triangulation between white and Black, that Asians are constantly moving between the two. And because of that, like our, the needs of our community, the concerns of our community, the things that, we have to even contribute are oftentimes overlooked and dismissed. And so I've seen that happen quite a few times, throughout my conversations with different people.
So the Asian American Collaborative that you lead currently, like, what's the formation of that? What is it about? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so we actually started. So for years, people have been asking me to start something for Asian American Christians, right? Because Asian American Christians have a distinct voice. We're like, we have something to contribute to the broader body of Christ, in the same way that our white brothers and sisters have something to contribute, our Black brothers and sisters, our Native American and our Latino brothers and sisters have something to contribute. And oftentimes the contributions of Asian American Christians are to essentially perpetuate the status quo, right? Advance the status quo and say, you have to fully assimilate and tell other communities of color and other Asian Americans that the way to succeed in the society, within the church kind of network systems and things like that, is to fully assimilate. And so for years, people have been talking, but I had, because I understand like how race operates in the society, which is a social construct, and we're trying to de-racialize to get to a point where race doesn't impact like people's lived experiences as much as it does, and where the same patterns, where we can try to address the patterns that seem to emerge in disparate places throughout the country. Like, one Asian American seems to experience the same thing as another, and it's a pretty systemic issue. um, during the pandemic, because of our national leaders and some of the media streams using language like China virus or Chinese flu or China flu or Kung flu, there was a massive spike in anti-Asian racism. That massive spike led to violence, everything from people being chased down streets to being spit on to being yelled at, to the point where someone was driving by my house, yelled out of their car, "You yellow piece of poop," right? Expletive. And I'm like, they saw nothing about me. I'm Korean American, I'm not Chinese, but because of the rhetoric, we get lumped into all of us get lumped into Chinese in the way that everyone was lumped into Japanese during during World War II, when the Japanese were being incarcerated in mass. So all the other Asians were trying not to be known as Japanese, so that they wouldn't get rounded up and then thrown into concentration camp. But we started, because we saw a rise in anti-Asian violence and overt anti-Asian racism that had always kind of existed under the surface. And like I said, there were all these things that were happening. And the worst of it was like, someone was taking out the trash and acid was thrown on them, just because she was Asian. I saw an elderly woman get drop kicked by two teens. Another elderly person was lit on fire, and it just over and over and over. And we saw thousands of cases emerge, and people were reporting and self-reporting. And one of the things that we found was that the number of cases were far higher, because I even heard from a friend of mine who's a pastor's wife. She was saying that her mom had worked at the post office for 30 years, and her colleague, who also worked at the post office with her for 30 years, said to her, "Shouldn't you not be coming into work because of the fact that you might have the virus?" And she is Korean American, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to do was make a statement, and we did. We drafted a statement where we got over 10,000 signatures from leadership, Christian leaders all throughout the country, from seminary presidents like the president of Fuller, Mark Labberton, to the seminary of Princeton, SBC guys like Dan Doriani and several others signed. Daniel Yang signed from here at Wheaton, and he's with the Send Network, and and other people that you're featuring, through this podcast or through this series, have signed on as well. And so we were really grateful to see kind of like a broad multiracial coalition emerge. But one of the things that we're trying to do is do something similar to what Jamar Tisby is doing with The Witness, right? Which is basically create a repository of Asian American Christian voices that are distinctly gospel-centered, committed to clear orthodoxy, committed to the scriptures, wanting to honor and glorify Jesus, and to live faithfully unto Christ in all things that we do, but also not erase the Asian American contribution in the process. And so we launched a podcast called Reclaim. People can check that out. We have a Reclaim magazine, which you can go online at the Asian American Christian Collaborative.com or Asian American Christian Collaborative.com, and there's a whole bunch of articles there. We have a whole bunch of videos that we've released, including a series called Interconnected, where we have Black Christian leaders and Asian American Christian leaders dialoguing about how to move towards kind of a mutuality in combating interminority tensions between the two communities, and then so on. And we have a lot of other things planned. But we did a march in Chicago. Almost somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people showed up, majority of them Asian Americans, over 100 churches, to march for Black Lives and Dignity. And we had, people like Watson Jones, Charlie Dates, and several others show up, Jonathan Banks at UMI, and to show up and march together. But and so we're just trying to find ways to show the world that the gospel leads our feet towards justice, towards righteousness, and that Asian American Christians have something unique to contribute to the shalom of our society.
Man, that's exciting. Definitely want to check all of that out. That's good. That's good. Last question for you, Pastor Raymond. And it's this: why do you stay? I mean, there's a lot that you've been expressing. Why do you stay?
Ultimately because I have hope in Jesus. And, I think, until God moves in another direction, or until I feel like I am no longer a prophetic voice in the spaces that I operate, that, I'm called to the places that to the place that I'm planted, that I know how to navigate a variety of cultures. I can fit pretty much anywhere, because I've traveled so much. And I think that's something that God has kind of just developed within me and shaped in and through me, shaped in me. But I also want to see a picture of Christ's kingdom, so that the world will know, right, that we are truly one, as we see in John 17. Because I think that one of the things that we're dealing with is the reality that it often is a lot of the assimilated people of color, the people of color that like will throw away a part of the things that will bring them into solidarity with other kind of Christians from their own ethnic or racial background, that end up in these spaces. And my hope is that, my faithful presence will allow a more robust kind of image of God's kingdom. I mean, to the point where I get non-Christians oftentimes saying, hey, I didn't realize that Christianity could be so much more robust. I always thought, when I think of Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, I think of fundamentalists who seem to be out of touch, not just culturally countercultural, but out of touch with some realities. And one of the things what I hope to be is to help sharpen our edges and smooth and round us out, staying committed to what the scriptures call us to. But I do think that that's an important part. And then I also think that, I think about the next generation, and wishing that I had someone that was willing to do the things that I am trying to do now, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And with greater kind of energy and greater kind of conviction to really put their necks on the line, to speak up in a way that is both truthful and loving, but not compromising on truth, because that's what we oftentimes see in these spaces. And then ultimately, I think it's important for the witness of the gospel. I don't think, we pastors talk a lot about the importance of like whether people would know, whether it would matter if your church died, and whether your neighbors would care. And if your neighbors don't care that your church is no longer gone, or it doesn't exist, that we're not doing a good job of reaching out to our community with gospel truth and with gospel hospitality and with gospel love. And I am concerned that when most people look into the windows of kind of evangelicalism, they don't see a witness that is compelling, right? The thing that should be offensive is the gospel, not Christians who are kind of falling in line with kind of the things that are of this world, and falling in line in the sinful patterns of the world. And so trying to break through and helping. And there are many good people that are doing that, Black, white, Asian, Latino, Native American. But I wanted to add my voice, and I think many people are trying to do it more faithfully. And I just see myself as kind of adding a log to the fire that's growing, and one that I hope doesn't burn out, but could easily burn out, if enough of us leave.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Raymond, we appreciate your voice, and thank you for your words, man. We could continue on and more with this. This has been really fruitful and helpful. So thank you. And this is Where Life Exists, where we talk about everyday issues from a biblical and balanced perspective. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.
I'd love to hear from you. What did you feel as you watched today's episode? What did you learn? What encouraged you? Leave a comment below to let us know. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date on our latest videos and interviews.